Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wondered if we're using AI too much and if it is making us dumber? Well, this new paper dives deep into that big question. Think about it. We've got tools like ChatGPT and others that can basically write essays, code, analyze data, and answer complex questions. Almost 1 billion people are using this stuff now. But what happens when we let AI do all the thinking for us, especially when we don't really know much about the topic ourselves? This research asks exactly that. They're looking at a new kind of automation, one that is different from the autopilot in a plane or even a calculator. This is something that can automate the entire thinking process for any task, for anyone, anywhere. It is a really big deal, and the researchers are worried we don't really know what the consequences are. Before we get into the AI stuff, let's quickly break down how humans think when they do a task. The researchers use a framework that divides thinking into 4 stages. Stage 1 is information acquisition, just getting the facts. Stage 2 is information analysis, figuring out what those facts mean. Stage 3 is decision selection, deciding what to do based on the analysis. And stage 4 is action specification, actually figuring out how to do it and getting it ready to go. Now, normally when we build automation, it only handles 1 or 2 of these stages. For example, a calculator automates the math part, stage 4, but you still have to figure out the problem and which formulas to use, stages 1, 2, and 3. Even professional tools like medical AI might analyze data and suggest diagnosis. But a doctor still needs to gather patient info and decide on treatment. This is crucial because it means humans are still involved, still thinking, and still have a chance to catch mistakes. But GenAI, like ChatGPT, can do all 4 of these stages at once. From the moment you ask it something, it is acquiring information, analyzing it, deciding what to say, and formatting it perfectly for you. Imagine a chart where one axis is how much of the thinking process the automation handles, and another axis is how many people are using it. Traditional automation, like GPS or spell checkers, are on the lower end of the thinking stages, but they reach millions or billions of people. Professional systems like airline autopilots handle more thinking stages, but have very few trained users. GenAI is unique because it hits the highest level of automation for thinking at a massive scale with no training required. It's in its own dangerous category. So the core problem is this: when automation handles all 4 thinking stages and the user has no specialized knowledge in that area, they can't verify if the AI is right. You ask it to write a legal brief, you get a legal brief, but if you are not a lawyer, how do you know if it is accurate or if it invented some fake legal precedents? Let's break this down by those 4 stages. For information acquisition, traditional systems needed you to tell them what to look for. You ask a database a specific question, but GenAI, when you ask it to summarize something, it decides what is recent and what is significant, all on its own. You can't really check its work because you don't know how it decided what was important. For information analysis, think about statistical software. It does the calculations, but you, as the analyst, need to know if the assumptions for those tests are met and if the results make sense. GenAI will analyze your data and give you an interpretation, but if you don't have the stats background, you can't tell if it picked the right tests or if its conclusions are valid. It is like asking a chef to tell you if a medical diagnosis is right. They might be an expert in food, but not in medicine. Then there is decision selection. Autopilots make decisions about flying the plane, but pilots are trained to watch and intervene. Recommendation systems, like for movies, are also stage 3, but they're in a low-stakes, narrow field. People can easily say, no, I don't want to watch that. But GenAI, when asked to write code for a complex task, makes decisions about algorithms and structure. Without programming knowledge, you can't judge if its choices are correct or efficient. And finally, action specification. Smart home devices are a good example of stage 4 automation, reaching many people. They turn on a light or adjust the thermostat. You can immediately see if it worked, but GenAI creates whole documents, code, or analysis. If it generates a legal argument that sounds convincing but is legally flawed, you wouldn't know. You are just getting the final product without any of the intermediate cognitive steps that would allow you to verify it. The researchers are really concerned about something called the lumberjack effect. This is an old finding in automation research. It basically says that the higher up the thinking stage automation goes, the worse the consequences are if the automation fails. Stage 4 failures are the most severe. But this effect was studied with trained people dealing with specific kinds of automation in limited areas. GenAI breaks all of those rules at once. They point out a new problem here: undetected delegation failure. This is different from just being lazy or not paying attention, which are classic automation problems. This is when you can't detect an error because you lack the basic knowledge to even understand what an error looks like. It is like asking someone who has never seen a piano to tell if a musician is playing a wrong note. They just don't have the framework to judge. Another big issue is trust. Usually, we learn to trust systems based on how they perform over time in predictable situations. If the autopilot always holds altitude well, you trust that feature. But GenAI operates everywhere. You might have a great experience getting it to write a poem, so you then blindly trust it for medical advice, which is incredibly dangerous. The boundaries of what it can reliably do are fuzzy and constantly shifting, making it impossible to calibrate your trust properly. And what about maintaining our own skills? When automation handles everything, we stop practicing those thinking muscles. For tasks where we have no expertise, we're not just losing skills, we might never develop them. We're simply pushing all the cognitive work onto the AI, and we become passive recipients of its output. This is a fundamental shift in how we engage with tasks and information. The sheer scale of GenAI is also a huge concern. When you have a billion people using something, even a low error rate can lead to massive widespread problems. If GenAI produces biased information and millions of people accept it without question, that bias can spread like wildfire. In professional settings, there are usually checks and balances. But with general public use, those safeguards are gone. So what is the takeaway here? The researchers argue that GenAI is so fundamentally different from previous forms of automation that the old rules and theories might not apply. They've pushed 4 key dimensions show much thinking AI does, who uses it, how broad the applications are, and how many people use it to their absolute extremes, all at once. This is a critical moment. We're in a massive uncontrolled experiment with a technology that is changing how we think and work at an unprecedented speed. The science behind automation existed for situations that were much more controlled. Now, we need to rapidly figure out how these new AI systems affect us, especially when we're using them for things we don't understand. For practitioners, this means we can't just assume our old design rules for automation work anymore. We need to be incredibly cautious. For researchers, there is a huge amount of work to do to understand these new phenomena. We need to study not just if GenAI makes mistakes, but how those mistakes happen, how people react or don't react to them, and what it means for our cognitive abilities and our societies when we delegate so much thinking. This isn't just about being aware of AI errors. It is about understanding a fundamental shift in the human-machine relationship. If we don't figure this out quickly, we might find ourselves in a situation where we've automated our thinking to the point of not being able to recognize when it goes wrong. What do you think about this research? Are you relying heavily on AI for tasks you are not an expert in? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science distilled, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching.